Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. As you see, there's a variety. So you had some time to look at the slide. There's a variety of social. And yeah, I'm asking a very philosophical question. What is X question? What is a social interaction? And I just came to this question because of my work on social cognition, and social interaction plays an important role. And it's a very current work. So it's work in progress. I'm pretty thankful for any input that I can get from you. And so let's see where we go with this philosophical question in an hour or so. So I'm going to assume familiarity with the social cognition debate. There's a wealth of theories about how we understand each other, what mechanisms or strategies we employ to make sense of each other in social interaction in the complex social world. Oh God, I should maybe close my email, but anyway, maybe there's not so busy. So there's a wealth of theories here, which I'm not going to go into, but if you look at the landscape of theories of social cognition, there's a regarding the role of interaction for these theories, and there's also maybe some kind of incompatibility among some of them, whereas there is a compatibility among some of them as well. So many people have become pluralists in the social cognition debate about how we understand each other. Depending on various factors, you have to do more cognitive work than in other situations, for example. And this is going to be in the background of what I'm going to investigate here. So what I want to start with is that in this debate in the last 30 years or so, there has been an emphasis on the role of interaction in social understanding. So for example, Vasu Reddy, she's one of these people who pushed a second-person approach, what they call a second-person approach to social understanding, which rejects the kind of cognitive gap that there is between oneself and the other person's mind, that you have to cross by some inferential mechanism like theory or simulation and so on. So in a second-person situation where you are addressing each other as a you, she claims that there are certain kinds of engagement where you have much simpler ways of engaging with each other and with of understanding each other. So so she rejects the gap, and also sort of, as she calls it, she pluralizes the other. So there's rejecting the assumption of singularity in the way we sometimes talk of other minds or of the other. So engagement, interaction is sort of put to the forefront and emphasized as an important factor that makes a difference in how we understand each other. And there are several other people who have made this point in the debate. For example, Sean Gallagher, he distinguishes between various kinds of intersubjectivity, for example, based on Colvin Trevarton's work on primary intersubjectivity, where you have here the still face procedure, for example, where a mother interacts with a baby, but then suddenly stands still and doesn't react anymore, and the baby gets distressed, because it's used to the back and forth and the reciprocity and the embodied nature of the interaction in terms of gestures, in terms of pointing, alerting each other to certain things. And Gallagher says, rather than engaging in some kind of inference and simulation procedures, we have very basic embodied practices, emotional, sensory motor, or perceptual ways of understanding each other, because we know how to express ourselves, and we just thereby also have some kind of know-how what the other person's gestures and expressions mean. So and the direct face-to-face interaction is therefore center stage and the primary way of interacting with each other, and that's the emphasis of the so-called enactive approach or the interaction theory that he puts forward. Similarly, Chris Frith has emphasized the role and importance of reciprocity of social interactions in contrast to physical interactions. So, the big difference from actions with the physical world to the face-to-face interaction with a social partner is that there's a communication loop. The way that the other reacts to what I'm trying to get across or to understand makes a difference for me in how the interaction evolves and so on. So this social understanding is then some kind of cooperative venture. The flow of understanding, the flow of cognition is never just one way, because it's sort of very essentially reciprocal in contrast to our investigations of stones and stars and other physical stuff. Similarly, Stephen Butterfield has distinguished between so-called interacting mind readers and simply bystanders. So the interacting mind reader has is in a position to know things which she would be unable to know if she were unable to interact with her target. So if you have a situation here like helping each other with a trolley, so just by the embodied expression of the intention, to understand that your goal to get this thing up the stairs is your joint goal now, because this partner expresses certain actions and so on, and intentions thereby. So in the face-to-face interaction with kind of embodied practices, you have a better knowledge base in what to work on in order to understand what the other person might be wanting to do. So you have so this facilitates knowledge in a way, in contrast to mere observation. There's a different set of experiments here by Henrique Moll and Melinda Carpenter, Michael Tomasello, about what children at a certain age know. So if you have 14-month-old babies and 18-month-old babies and compare them, so the 18-month-olds would be able to point and understand what a certain elderly person wants if they based on stuff that is in the room, for example, these kinds of toys. But for 14-month-olds, it makes a difference whether they have engaged with the person beforehand. So they know what they are already familiar with because they played with a certain toy, but not with another toy. And therefore, the interaction helps them to understand things which they otherwise would not yet understand. So that's there's a certain difference there. So interaction is, again, important, or joint engagement. And this point is, of course, then stressed and put to use in so-called activist approaches to social understanding, which they call participatory sense making, as Hanne de Jager and Ezequiel Di Paolo put it. You have certain interactions where the interaction itself becomes an autonomous process, and therefore by sort of reaching this kind of autonomy, it sort of enables or constitutes the understanding between certain participants. That can be taken a bit too far, because it might sound mysterious that the understanding or social cognition is not in someone's head or in someone's brain or in someone's mind, but only in the interaction process among them. So out here, that's how it's sometimes put. But of course, she's right that at a certain level of intensity, a sort of interactive process can become autonomous or can get a life on its own, where it makes a big difference to social understanding. And that's why they call it participatory or the constitutive sense making, where both partners constitute the understanding. Tom Fröse, in a paper in a similar way, sort of then makes a distinction between these cases where you sort of interact face to face, which he calls like genuine intersubjectivity, in contrast to second-rate cases where you're not engaging in this way, and then this kind of intersubjectivity is only second class in a way. And then for these primary cases of face-to-face interaction where you have an autonomous interaction, you sort of also need crisscrossing interactive mechanisms. So you can't really look into one brain to measure the neural basis or neural correlates of social understanding, because you would need to find processes that crisscross both persons, both brains, and so on involved. There can be a lot of commentary on that. I've published something on that in back 2018. Just want to stress that there is this kind of extreme interpretation of the role of interaction, and then which drives a wedge between cases of intersubjectivity or social interaction, where you have the good class, the sort of, observational class in a sense, where you interact or engage with the other. Okay, so I get it. You might say interaction plays important roles in social understanding, but we wanted to ask, what is a social interaction? It seems to be sort of presupposed that we know what that is, rather than sort of giving a definition maybe, or a characterization of social interaction, or maybe we can just presuppose or assume a common sense notion of interaction, because when we see it, we know that we have a kind of interaction going. And of course, philosophy has been has a poor record of giving definitions of anything ever since Socrates demanded them. So it's not clear that we can succeed in this call if we ask for a definition, but we can also answer the question of what is a social interaction, not by giving a definition, but giving a sort of a characterization that covers all cases, if that's okay. And then in differentiated ways. So that may be the strategy. So, we don't want to dwell on the function of social interaction. It's important. We want to sort of go for a characterization of all forms of social interaction, if that's possible. So, and there will be many interesting cases that we can look at when we move away from the classic human-human paradigm or typical case. And of course, there has been an attempt to give a definition of social interaction in a TICS paper. The same enactivist group sort of tried to not only emphasize interaction as central to understanding social cognition, but also provide us with a definition and outlining different roles that it can play. It can be just simply a contextual factor in the background. It can be stronger in being an enabling condition for a certain kind of understanding, and that's the claim in some cases, the interaction itself can constitute or can be a constitutive element of a social understanding or social cognitive process. And that's sort of then outlined in the paper. But this is a differentiated view where you can have a weak role for social interaction up to a more stronger view, which I outlined, when the interaction itself is constituting the understanding, or is supposed to be constituting the understanding. So in the glossary in that paper, they give a definition here. A social interaction takes place instantiated when two or more autonomous agents are co-regulating their coupling, with the fact that their autonomy is not destroyed and their relational dynamics acquire an autonomy of their own. Examples are conversations, collaborative work, joint intentionality, arguments, collective action, dancing, and so on. So here a number of notions that are really part of the theoretical arsenal of the autopoietic enactivists. So coupling and autonomy and dynamics, they are all cashed out really with respect to simple organisms like single cells and so on, initially by Varela and Thompson and Maturana, but then applied now to the social domain in order to characterize interactions which can also become autonomous in a way when you have reached a certain level of interaction. That's important here, because not just any kind of interacting or like encounter is already sufficient to reach the level of coupling that's meant here, or that's required. So in a different paper, the Jaeger and Di Paolo, they give the following definition, which is very similar. So social interaction is the regulated coupling between at least two autonomous agents, where the regulation is aimed at aspects of the coupling itself, so that it constitutes an emergent autonomous organization in the domain of relational dynamics without destroying in the process the autonomy of the agents that are involved. So again, here, maybe let me stress the autonomous character of the agents, which is important. And also it seems to be the case that the examples that dwell on are really tailored to human interactions, right? You know, if you're dancing a tango, it's a very embodied kind of interaction where you have some kind of implicit understanding of what you're doing next. But conversations, very linguistically formed interactions, collaborative work where you sort of maybe not in their terms, but maybe in other terms, represent each other's task in the pursuit of a joint goal, for example, and so on. So very human-like examples here. But as I said, for this to work and for the interaction process itself to replace individual cognitive mechanisms for social understanding, as they claim and as Fröse claims, there has to be a certain level of interaction already in place. And the problem is that, you know, this kind of encounter or like being on a tube together, that doesn't count. So you need to have reached a certain level of coupling. The coupling between the agents must have reached a certain level for this to be possible. And I would claim, you know, in this sense, the interaction process itself or interactive mechanisms cannot really replace any individual cognitive mechanisms, as they claim, because someone has to get the guy doesn't make a move, there will be no coupling, there will be no interaction taking place, and they will not reach the level of autonomy for the interaction process that's necessary to constitute some kind of understanding. So someone must make a move, and some certain things are involved in this making a move as a toolkit, for example, that we come back to. For example, maybe core mechanisms that allow you to individuate an agent from an object and so on. So there's some basic stuff going on that helps you individuate someone that is a potential collaboration partner or interaction partner in the first place. So the strong sort of claim that is involved in this approach doesn't seem to hold. Although I should say, in fairness, that they say only in some cases can they these interaction mechanisms replace individual cognitive mechanisms. So it's not always the case. As a sort of cognitivist reaction to that move, Chris Frith and Mattia Gallotti have put forward the idea of a V mode, you know, in very representationalist terms. So in order to counter this move that the interaction process is doing any work, they say, well, we can stick to the interaction playing an enabling role rather than a constitutive role. And sort of when we are engaged in a joint action and we sort of cook together and may represent each other's task, one is doing the sauce, the other is doing the vegetables and so on, then we can represent aspects of the interactive scene in the we mode. So there's action in the I mode and there's action in the we mode, and we can just switch. And then we have a collaborative situation. Would be nice if it was that easy. I think the same reply holds. You know, why don't infants just switch to the we mode if they have it, right? So when does it emerge and how does it emerge? We can ask questions. We have written a little letter there in TICS as a reply to that, making similar points that, you know, it is the interaction itself that sort of constitutes or, you know, helps to get the we mode, that you kind of understand that you do things together. When infants, for example, engage in joint attention and, you know, get an interest in showing an adult the blue sky or something like that. Look, that's fun and so on. When you share information. So that doesn't work as a basic move, I think. As I mentioned, there's a move by other people to rely on sort of core systems, and I think they might be very in order as a basic toolkit that we have, because we can sort of very easily, and very young infants, of course, as Elizabeth Spelke and Susan Carey have investigated, can individuate an object from an agent by certain signature limits, certain features that like biological motion and so on, or self-propelled motion. And the same seems to hold for numbers and places, where we have core systems that sort of allow us to recognize these things when we see them, for example. Gary Marcus makes a big point about this, in relation to the discussion of AI systems being intelligent or being able to understand, be socially engaging and so on. He says, well, they don't have any core knowledge, so it doesn't seem to work. But he only relies on that theory, so, and thinks that's psychology. That's basically the truth. Maybe a bit narrow-minded, but it's one important aspect, and maybe there's some stuff that is learned by experience, and then there are these core systems that are very basic and allow you to just identify an agent, which then, according to Spelke, Kinsler, and Carey, allows you to have a further derived sort of system for social relations. That's an hypothesis that they put forward recently and followed up the recent developments there. In a very similar vein, Levinson, the linguist, makes a point and posits some kind of human interaction engine that makes us different from other species. It's a set of cognitive abilities and dispositions, but not a module. And I like the way he puts it, right away. I should underline, this is not a proposal for a social cognition module, a cultural acquisition device, or a cognitive culture system, or an interaction gene, or anything of that simple-minded sort. And then it's nice to be quoted in that bracket then, if you have the accusation of being simple-minded. Then, there may be some kind of tool that also emphasized by Cecilia Hayes, for example, as a mixture or combination between nature and nurture and so on. But this is just sort of positing capacities that are facilitating interaction. It's not just really saying what interaction is, right? So you get this stuff, you are endowed with a kind of interaction engine, and then you can get going. But what is happening then? So lots of this, as we saw, seems to focus on human-human interaction, and we have lots of new cases that we have to worry about. So what about the following intelligence and situations? So guys are going to follow us by in terms of structuring the talk a little bit. I just hope that's all right. So for example, in the human-human case, nowadays I was just having lunch and I saw 3 people at in the restaurant not talking to each other, only engaged in their phones. So people more and more interact with each other via some kind of digital technology, or they are following Anna on Twitter and social media and see that she's up to a certain project. It's not always clear that that you're engaging with a certain agent. You may be engaging or interacting with a bot and not know it and not recognize it, because they're really dominant, or really getting more and more nowadays since Elon has taken over. So I'm getting all kinds of likes every day by people with followers, just accounts apparently. And there has been a study, the Pew study in 2018, which said that, an estimated 2/3 of tweeted links to popular websites are posted by automated accounts, not by human beings. But we don't, that's going on in the background. It's just that you may be taking this for real, but it can also have potentially damaging effects in elections, as we all know. Let's see how it goes next year. There's, of course, what we do now, and take it for granted that you also have seen this video. I show it anyway because it's so much fun. So there's this Zoom where you have certain kinds of possibilities of interaction.
I believe you have a filter
which can go wrong.
Turned on in the video settings. You might want to.
Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that.
No.
The up arrow next to this.
No, he can't. He claims he can see that. He can't see it. Oh,
I have a cat.
There's a cat, We have lots of cats. It's a red thread in the there'll always be a cat around. You have certain factors or features, as we will see, of social interaction sort of checked, and others sort of go away, right, from paradigm situations. maybe in the near future, we will have robots at home or in workplaces, in educational context, when you have a triangular relation between teacher, student, and AI tool, for example, a robot. We will have maybe social robots in care, other social institutions, like Pepper, for example. There's also apparently, that's from Genova, from the IIT lab, you can interact by guiding your avatar. And then they sort of stopped it because they didn't want to spill the water over the robot. But there's all kinds of ways that we can use AI in order to interact with each other, and that creates new social interactions, new social situations. So robots, or social robots, seem to be a special thing. So there's this book by David Gong, Person Thing Robot, and he's on a book tour, and there's all kinds of media and social media coverage. There's discussions there about his claim that robots should be introduced as a third category between persons and things, because then sometimes we take robots to be things, when we take sort of the design stance in its terms, or sometimes we take them to be persons, like what's it called? A lambda claimed, I'm a person, and so on. And then sometimes we are very prone to take these to be persons. So he thinks that this sort of legally, ethically problematic. We should introduce robots as a special ontological category. And there's this debate, when people say, like Toby Walsh, they're just machines, but this stance sort of causes problems because people just sometimes can't help it. And I might alert you to another online series we have been going in Bochum. So this is the alert break, the advertisement. So So we have watch out for the. Is also going to present a talk in December on that topic. So as this very old video, which you are familiar with, I'm sure, shows that we are sort of interpreting very simple behavior as geometrical shapes in terms of intentional vocabulary, like chasing, fleeing, being afraid of, being angry, and so on. I don't want to lose time here on this video, but it seems that, if you create social robots and design them more and more human-like, like Sophia, for example, can be just, heighten and strengthening the attitude to take the intention rather than the design stance towards robots. And that, of course, then may cause problems, may cause advantages, whatever, but we have to deal with it. And it's sort of a new social situation. Kate Darling has some funny examples about how people treat their Roomba when they give it in to repair, because they're really attached to it, although it's not even human-like or anything like social-like. It's just a Hoover, but they give them names like Dustin Bieber, or like Meryl Sweep, to personalize them in a certain way, and then they seem to be wanting this machine back and not a new one if it's broken. So there are these stories. I don't know, I'm not attached to that. But it's also another example, very sad example, from this hitchhiking robot, which you might know, when sort of this robot was hitchhiking and across the world, and sort of took a diary and so on. And at some point in the US, it was sort of damaged and very badly beheaded, not just, sort of cut the wires or so, not treated like a machine, but like you would really want to kill it, like what really the victim of a very violent, aggressive act. And you would think that, well, there's some kind of anthropomorphization going on before you do that act, because otherwise you could just, if you want to get rid of it, you could just cut the wire or so. But that's not what people did, apparently. So there's even there this kind of thing going on. I want to introduce a recent framework introduced by Johanna Seibt and colleagues in Aarhus, which they call the OASIS framework. And when it comes to, that's the closest I could find to trying to really give an identification or characterization or definition of social interaction in this context, because is discussing this in the context of social robotics, of course, and she observed that, you know, cognitive science is a vast field, many disciplines are involved, and no matter like where you look, it's defined or characterized or used in a very different way. So the concept of social interaction varies across these disciplines. So in robotics, it can just motion in space. In anthropology, it could mean something cultural. In philosophy, certainly norms are involved here. Cognitive science, it can mean also some kind of physiology or physiological process. In sociology, statistics, and so on. So in different disciplines, different questions are asked, different methods are applied, and so different emphasis may be entering the characterization. And the goal is like to get some kind of general take that sort of can integrate these different meanings or aspects. And that's the project that they are pursuing. So OASIS means really an ontology of asymmetric social interactions. I should have added a C there in it. But the starting point is really, given the cases we looked at, introducing social robots is kind of risky. So in any case, you know, technology is progressing, no matter where it's going, at what pace it's going. We should, the humanities at least, follow and you know, discuss this progress and accompany it. And as I said, there's this sort of tension between taking the design stance towards it as a machine and taking the intentional stance towards it as a kind of person or a rational agent even, has put the contrast. And this sort of OASIS is supposed to be a guiding framework for the design of human-robot interaction. And they develop 10 levels of sociality that can integrate various accounts of social interaction from the literature, centered around degrees of coordination and explicit reflection of norms. Because not all basic interactions need be conscious, need be self-conscious, or need be reflective, and so on. Some can be very basically embodied, as we saw from the enactive approaches, and so on. And what they want is like to avoid the kind of simple anthropomorphization. This is a horrible word. And sort of that can explain then all cases of human-robot interaction, because they want to acknowledge the engagement in social interaction without the attribution of human capacities and fictional mental states, because many of the theories that I mentioned in the beginning are modeled obviously on the human-human case. And so if we are looking at the human AI case or human robot case, we may need to make adjustments. And of course, then the notion of simulation comes in that I can't capture today for the reasons of time, but I urge you to read her papers, because they're all very detailed and very differentiated. Because when we take not an anthropomorphizing stance towards the robot, then we can sort of acknowledge or we recognize very quickly or assume that they are just simulating. You know, if you take effective computing, you don't always just simply think that the robot feels an emotion. You know, you will have a background knowledge about how they work. Okay, it's a simulation, it's a program. It makes me believe that it feels whatever. So there are all these 10 levels, which are, I don't want to go into detail, but the basic first 4 are sort of very implicit, pre-reflective, unconscious, sometimes very embodied, socio-biological even. So if you have a case like this, famously from a movie, when you sort of
I'm sorry.
align your bodies in order to give way, but it doesn't work because each partner goes in the same wrong direction, so you can't get going. If this works in a busy street, then you have some kind of very simple alignment, bodily alignment, and so on. Of course, in that movie scene, she was doing it intentionally because she wanted to get in touch with him. spying. But there can be conditioning, there can be implicit kinds of understandings of norms which are not reflected. There can be a direct empathic perception of intentions in early infancy and childhood. So some stuff that is covered also by enactive approaches or second-person approaches as they have been introduced. Then there are further levels which draw on simulation and inference, and levels 5 to 10 will be sort of the classic mind-reading literature kind of cases where you have explicit instrumental understandings of practical force of conventions and norms. They can be involving psychological terms and can be pursued towards egocentric goals on level 8, or also in joint goals and for the benefit of the team as a whole. And if you can sort of take yourself a bit back and sort of not pursue your own egocentric goal, but work in favor of the team and reach level 10, for example. But she emphasizes, this is all, again, very, very human interaction, because drawn from human interaction. And it's not clear that she notes that robots would not qualify as social agents on any of these accounts. So if you have any theory like that, because it's part of the reason why these other accounts don't necessarily work when we want to apply them for the new cases of human AI interaction, because the interaction partners are not symmetrical. They are not autonomous in the same sense, in a way, not yet at least. And so what was required, if you remember from the enactive approach, that the interaction process constitutes understanding when there is a certain kind of reciprocity and interaction and autonomy of the agents, right? So that can't be taken for granted in these cases here. And what she suggests is that there will be cases in the human-robot interaction where we don't anthropomorphize, I'm getting better, but we sociomorph. And sociomorphing, I'm not sure whether she coined the term or whether that's already in the literature. That's a human mental agentive process that can be characterized by several features. But the idea is that that should apply also to pets or other animals. When you engage or interact with them, you don't take an anthropocentric or anthropomorphizing stance, but you recognize and perceive non-human characteristics in non-human entities and take them in their own right, in a way, and sort of give rise to interactive sense making in a situation of practical interaction. This all can take place pre-consciously, but also consciously, and you are not thinking about, as in the mind-reading literature, typically mental states are taken to be fictional entities that you ascribe, where you don't have to get it exactly right. If you take Dennett's word that the intentional stance is just heuristic, where when the explanation works of the behavior, then you are satisfied and you're successful. But you don't have to get it right, that Tony went to the fridge because he wanted beer rather than milk. He opened the fridge because he wanted something that he believed was in there. That's good enough. But here, then there are they are treated as fictional entities or fictional features. Here they are treated as actual features that you make sense of. So that's the general idea. And then this leads into via several steps now involving simulations or the acknowledgement or assuming of simulations in the robot to some kind of new account. Well, this is nice. Are we done? No. I think I have something more to say. So in a way, this could work if you pursue this and look at all the cases. This could be an approach that is taken. I'm not criticizing it. It's just that I have a different idea. So maybe we can cover all these cases of interaction that we looked at, not by giving a clear-cut definition that excludes other cases, because we maybe applied too strong to human cases and so on. But if you have another 5 or 6 minutes, then I can give you an idea of what I was thinking about. So the goal is to capture the differences in social interaction, but also the commonalities, I should add, in terms of characteristic profiles that result from a limited number of changing parameters that can be either satisfied or present in a weak way or in a strong way, other than that they are taken to be totally absent or totally present, and so on. So the model is like if you're tuning the volume of a stereo, for example, it can be louder and more or less loud. The challenge is, of course, what are the limited parameters that characterize all the interactions? So we don't want like 20 parameters, but we also can't do with one. So we need certain parameters that can be tuned and that should be able to cover all the cases of social interaction. And I'm happy for feedback in that regard, of course, because that's the sort of positive contribution now, and it's a work in progress. That's the state of the art that that my brain came up with. So the first one, of course, would be agency. Then I just mentioned them here: reciprocity, embodiment, shared spatiotemporal situation, and likeness. So let's look at these in turn. So the hypothesis is that for an interaction to be social, it's required at least that one of the agents or one of the participants involved attributes agency to one party. So in that case, we can exclude this kind of silly politician who wanted to gain some votes by pretending to be happy with the tree. So so interactions with trees don't count as social interactions. Maybe we want, some people might want to cover all these cases because there are people who live like that, but it's just a question whether you want to cover as many cases as possible or whether you want to make room for misrepresentations or mistakes where things go wrong. So that's a question in the background that I haven't really addressed yet, but I would say it's not a classical case of social interaction. So if agency is not attributed in a certain sense, then we don't have a social interaction. So agency is sort of taken for granted, and then we can get going and sort of look at more factors or features that characterize social interactions. Okay. Reciprocity, I had emphasized in the beginning of the talk, by all the second-person approaches and so on. We can take the lessons from these inactive and second-person approaches that this is a kind of important factor that characterizes many, many typical cases of social interaction. And that's sort of not restricted to human interaction. You saw that Sophia, of course, is also very sort of interactive and sort of reciprocal in their behavior, at least. Embodiment, again, we can take all kinds of lessons from 4E cognition approaches and, of course, developmental psychology in terms of primary intersubjectivity, where non-linguistic proto-conversations go on between mother and infant, for example, and so on, where you have embodiment, intercorporality, as Merleau-Ponty put it, going on, that facilitates some of the understanding, a mutual understanding that's going on there. Thomas Fuchs also has emphasized this point in his work on the ecological brain. A shared spatiotemporal situation, we saw in certain examples, for example, on Zoom or like with Twitter and so on, it's not really clear that we always have to share some spatiotemporal situation. We partly do right now, but everyone is in different places on Zoom. And in a sense, we still are in the same room, so to speak. But it's a very sort of special case. Right now, I can only see Matt, for example. The others are dark for me. So it's just interacting with at least one face, but maybe not so much for you all among each other. So likeness, we can interact with all kinds of animals and then social robots and so on. And maybe what Johanna Seid calls sociomorphing can be captured by this kind of feature of likeness, even also emphasized in Andy Melsov's work on the like-me hypothesis as a foundation for social cognition. So it plays a role when they emphasize sort of the role of simulating the other in understanding each other, that it makes a difference how like me I take the other person to be. So it's much easier, and that's also maybe partly the challenge in Thomas Nagel's famous bat example. It's easier to imagine what another person feels when they are in pain, rather than trying to empathize with a bat, or trying to take their perspective and understand them, because it's not like me. It's not very much like me. So and then you can cash this out in terms of robots and so on, where there is certain kinds of likeness present or not. So let's have a look at different profiles. So you can have the observational case where you're not engaged in with someone, but you're just really only observing others and do some mind reading. What has been called spectatorial human-human situations. You can sort of say that of course there's some agency attribution, and there's not so much reciprocity going on. So it's a strong red. There's a strong no. It's very weak. Embodiment, of course, you see bodies acting and expressing something, so it's not really absent, but you don't get the same kind of information that you get when you're interacting face to face. That's why it's a bit weaker. You may be sharing a spatiotemporal situation, but only in certain respects. In other respects, you're sort of outside the spatiotemporal context of interaction, because you're not involved, you're not engaged. But of course, the others that you observe, the other humans are like you. You have the full-blown human-human face-to-face engaged cases where everything is very strong, simple. You may have human-robot interactions with a profile where, of course, there may be some attribution of agency, but I should have maybe weakened that green a little bit. There's almost no reciprocity, at least not as in other cases. There's some kind of embodiment, but it's really maybe limited in the way that the gestures that can be expressed and so on. But that can, of course, be strengthened in progress of technology. You are sharing a spatiotemporal situation, as in this picture, but you're not very like each other. Tricky with human-animal interaction here. You have, of course, not much likeness, but as far as pets go, you can, as far as feelings and certain intentions are concerned, you can pretty much assume a stronger likeness than the body would suggest, or what's going on in terms of perspective taking and so on. But of course, the other factors are quite present. That's what should be the case in pet situations. Human-human interaction via digital technologies, you always get different profiles. There's almost no embodiment because there can be also delays. So that's why reciprocity is quite weaker, because there can be quite fast online Twitter dialogues or whatever, WhatsApp, which is not really AI, but it's just technology where you interact in different ways. That can be sort of in the moment, but they can also be very delayed. Likeness, of course, because you are suggesting or assuming that you are interacting with another human agent when they respond to you. But it's not so clear on Twitter, again, when you have bots involved and so on, and it's maybe difficult. You may be mistaken, but you don't share any spatiotemporal situation there. The Zoom case, of course, is...
Mr. Parton, I believe
again a bit weaker. You can judge
on.
yourself, because we are on Zoom now, and I think that's it. I think I made it in time. 55 minutes. Thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to your feedback and input and questions. Thanks.